Dear readers of the European Sting, there's one thing that drew my attention last week. The statement of the President of the European Commission, Mr. Manuel Barroso, during the Berlin Roundtable on Youth Unemployment on the 3rd of July. During that speech, Barroso did his best to cover up all the mess that the American scandal on espionage had created on the EU-US relations, especially when the infamous whistleblower Edward Snowden brought to light more spicy information that reveals how the NSA had bugged the EU mission in New York. The President of the Commission, in a desperate attempt to utterly surrender to the USA and bring back the discussions for the transatlantic trade and investment partnership between the EU and the US, made two major linguistic clumsy repetitions that give away his unreasonable panic on the issue. He repeated 3 times the phrase "in parallel" and 3 times the phrase "as soon as possible." The word "in parallel" refers to the EU's intention to proceed promptly with the TTIP and then in parallel to form US-EU working groups to investigate the possibility for data privacy breaches in the EU. And this despite the utter humiliation that the EU received when it was uncovered that Germany, the EU mission at New York, and my mother from the south of Portugal were taped day and night to prevent terrorist attacks in the EU. This is bollocks. The surveillance scandal was an undoubted reason to put pressure on the US side and ask for further information in order for the trade agreement to proceed. That was our only hope and leverage as Europeans not to have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles inside our fridge. But the EU has miserably failed in taking this opportunity for a hard political bargain. Instead, Barroso and his friends bowed unprecedentedly to Obama and his data violation lovers, explaining last week that the fact that even the European dogs were bugged at New York is a minor issue compared to the benefits of the trade agreement. Barroso repeated 3 times the word "in parallel" with an intensely emphatic tone. He said trade agreement negotiations and data protection working groups are to operate in parallel. Correct me if I am wrong, but last time I checked, 2 parallel lines are bound not to ever meet. That is exactly what the Portuguese former Prime Minister aims at. That the TTIP and the data protection issue never cross roads. Because he knows very well that data privacy, if discussed in depth with our dear American partners, it could blow the whole agreement in the air, just like a firework on the 4th of July. For God's sake, he dares to see this as 2 individual and different things. Just like apples and lemons. For the love of God, these are not 2 different issues. Imagine a TTIP of EU-US when Obama knows what color was the morning poop of Merkel's dog. Because this is what we have here. The US know everything under covert circumstances that will never be brought to light. In that case, then, the EU will be always the loser in this trade agreement. The NSA today even knows which of the members of the European Parliament have a mole in their right thigh. Mr. Barroso, how can you call everybody in the EU to proceed with the TTIP without demanding the clarification of the issue from the US, as a precondition for the negotiations of the agreement to begin? To be entirely fair with them both, the Commission, the Parliament and the Council, right after the revelations on espionage came to light, they rushed to make long statements condemning the American practices and demanding urgent clarifications. Ladies and gentlemen, and the Oscar this year goes to the EU officials ellipsis Mr. Schulz, President of the European Parliament, Mr. Van Rompuy and Mr. Barroso, while at first intensely condemning the US spying practices that saw the light of publicity at the end of last month, they came to underplay now data violation in favor of the trade agreement with the US. Do our EU leaders have a big heart and tend to forget and forgive, or they are just messing around with our intelligence? And for the God's sake, why Barroso said 3 times the phrase "as soon as possible"? Why this rush for the trade agreement? Did we leave the rent unpaid or something? The TTIP, if and when will be concluded, will be the biggest trade agreement in the planet. For sure it can be beneficial for both parties under several strict conditions. But why rushing things up? We've got a million things to discuss and negotiate. Data privacy must be another very important topic on the agenda right after genetically modified milk and carrots. It cannot be discussed in parallel, as Barroso idiotically insists, in order to fool around with our minds. Data privacy is one of the major issues. What the recent huge scandal brought to light is not something to be covered up. It is the issue. Can we have a trade agreement where data privacy is for trade too? Because that is what the Americans do with their stooges, Google and Facebook. Participating just like that and as soon as possible in the trade agreement means that the European citizen needs to come to terms, also as soon as possible, with the idea that his secret phone discussion with his urologist is also known to the EU and US surveillance agencies. This is not a topic to be discussed in parallel, but the mother of all topics. And the trade agreement with the US should not move forward as soon as possible, but as slow as possible. Unless the European Union owes a lot of money to the US and we need to pay them back with a fast, unconditioned TTIP with a total political and economical surrender. Do we? Until next week, join the hive.